Welcome to the latest webinar in our series of Getting Started in Clinical Education Research. My name is Hugh Alberti. I am a GP and Professor of General Practice Education at Newcastle University, and I'm hosting our series. Today we are looking at getting started in running interviews and focus groups. And our visiting speaker, I'm really pleased to say, is Dorian Alaru, who will introduce herself, but I've known her for we're working with her for the last 10 years. So it's great to hear from her. Just to kind of reinstate that the idea of this series is it's run by the Incubator for Clinical Education Research, which is funded by the NIHR to try and encourage clinicians to get involved in education research. And this series is very much for beginners and newcomers. If folk are here are quite experienced, that's fabulous to have you with us, and it'd be great to hear from you when we have small group discussions, etc. But it's very much geared for starters. But if you look on our website, and all that information will come up at the end, there's lots of other masterclasses and other types of training opportunities for others as well. I actually can't remember what number webinar this is during the year, but we started in October, so I could probably count. But the sessions we've had already have all been recorded and are up on our website. So if this is the first one you've come to and you thought, oh, that was quite helpful, then do have a look on the website, both for sessions that we've already done, but also for upcoming sessions. So it's the third Wednesday of each month. And as I said, have a look on the website for more information. For today's session, can I encourage people in the chat box just to introduce themselves? There's going to be too many of us to introduce ourselves verbally. So if we could do it on the chat box, just say who you are and where you work. And it's always interesting, maybe I'm just nosy, but it's always interesting to find out who else is around. You might even find someone who's working next door to you that you didn't know was attending. So do introduce yourself there. Regarding putting your cameras on, no need to at all during the presentation time. But when we're in the small groups, if you can do, we'd ask you just to put your camera on and unmute yourself, because there'll be a chance we will give you something to discuss, but it's also a chance just to catch up and find out who else is in the group. So mute and videos off, feel free to during the talk, but unmute and videos on, please, for the small group session. And I think without further ado, because I've definitely rabbited on for too long, I will now pass you over to Dr. Dorian Alaru.
Hello, thank you, Hugh. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me here today. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorian. I'm a GP and a clinical lecturer in Newcastle University. I'm glad to be here today to talk about how to run interviews and focus groups. Lee, please, can you help me launch the poll on to gather people's experiences of doing focus groups and interviews, just to know where everybody is at?
Certainly.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. Please, could you answer the questions on the poll, and then we'll see, where everybody is at. Just to say, this session is more for you. It's actually for you. So although I have some slides here and I have some content I'd like to go through, it's about you. So if you have any questions, feel free to answer and feel free to ask as we go along. You can pop your questions in the chat screen, which we'll be monitoring. Also, feel free to share your opinions and your experiences as well as we go along. I'm happy to be interrupted with questions if there are too many things that I've said that's not making lots of sense. Our learning outcomes for today. Lee, please, could you share the results of the poll? Thank you. Okay, so we've got most people have conducted one or more focus groups or interviews. That's very good. That's fantastic. You're welcome to share your views about what has worked and what challenges you faced during these interviews and focus groups, and what tips to share with others. And a lot of people are actually planning to conduct one soon. So that's good, because that will this will hopefully help you in terms of how to conduct your focus groups and interviews. And some people have observed, that's good, and some people don't have any experience. And that takes us to what the learning outcomes are today. So by the end of this session, the aim is that everybody will be able to describe what is required to successfully conduct interviews and focus groups. We'll be able to prepare a discussion schedule for focus groups and interviews, describe the role of an interviewer or a facilitator, and distinguish between conducting interviews and focus groups. So the main steps for conducting interviews and focus groups are the preparation, things to do before, conducting the interviews or focus groups themselves, and the reflection after. So I'll take them in bits. What I've done is I'm going to shy away from using the slides so that it can be interactive, so that I can see, I can know if there are any questions coming in, and just literally know if somebody wants to say something. So I will only use the slides where there are lots of details that I want to cover. Right, so going on to the preparation. So in terms of conducting your focus groups or interviews, I'll just call them events so that I don't break my tongue by the end of today. In terms of conducting focus groups or interviews, the first thing to think about is that both of them are methods for collecting qualitative data. So the kind of data you want to collect is mainly words, and you want to know more about the participants' views, their experiences, how they interpret those experiences by interacting with them. So you literally have a discussion with the participants to know all these things, and you want to dig deeper. Now, in interviews, it is a one-to-one interaction. The researcher interacts with the interviewee or with the participants. But in focus groups, it's one to a number of people. So you have, a number of people, about 6 to 10 is what is recommended for focus groups, so that you can get meaningful data from them. If you have too many people, it becomes only a few people dominate the interaction, and you don't get a lot of representative views from lots of people. And if you have too little people, then you don't really get lots of different views to compare. So you want about 6 to 10 people. Now, in terms of the preparation, the other thing to think about is the materials you need. So you want your consent form, you want your information sheet. And the information sheet is pretty much just telling them about what the research is about, what's going to happen during the event, focus groups or interviews, what you would do with the data that you collect, that i.e. you're going to transcribe it, you're going to anonymize it, and you're going to publish it. You're going to analyze and publish it. And also giving them the opportunity to opt out, that they can always opt out if they want to. And then the consent just literally asks if they agree to participate, which they're expected to return to you before you start to conduct the event. Now, the next other thing is, very importantly, the recording device. So nowadays, the smartphones are very good at recording. They record high quality sound, so you don't really need anything fancy, just record on the smartphone. But it's very important as well to have a backup, because ask me, things just do go wrong. So somebody might have pressed pause or not recorded and all that. So you want a backup, but there might be too much noise and things like that. So you want a backup, which you can use, your laptop, your iPad, or a dictaphone. Some people use dictaphones to record, but really, you don't need to spend extra money nowadays. You can just literally use another device as a backup. And then you cannot have your focus groups or interviews without the participants. So you have to think about how to recruit your participants, or what type of participants to recruit. And in terms of what groups of participants to recruit, it's really driven by the research questions. And you might need some advice from your supervisors or from the research team in terms of where to recruit from and which method of recruitment to use. But basically, you want to use a range of media to recruit, because sometimes it's quite difficult to get the number of participants you want. So emails, social media, Facebook, other groups that are relevant to them, personal contacts as well. You can even ask people that have signed up for your focus groups or interviews to invite other people as well. One thing to consider is that sometimes people sign up for these things and don't come. And there was one of the times, one of my events I've had, I think I had about 7 people signing up and only 3 people came. So it's quite, you can expect that some people don't come. So what I learned from that is you need to be proactive about reminding people and getting their commitment to come. And also you want to recruit more people than you need, so that in case people don't come, which will happen, then you still have a number that is useful for you. And then the venue. Traditionally, these events are done, face to face, but nowadays, especially since the pandemic, people have been doing them online, which then allows you to collect data from people from different parts of the world, really. So that's the advantage of having it online. But face to face too is useful because you can get you get a better interaction with people when you're doing it face to face. And if you're going to be doing that face to face, you want to consider the venue. Now, you want a venue that is familiar to the people you're interviewing or the participants themselves, easy to get to as well so that they don't give up coming. You want it to be quiet enough so that your recording can be good quality and clear. You also want it to be not too formal so that people can feel comfortable to express their views. So, for instance, my research was on patient involvement in medical education. And I was talking to patients. That was the first focus group I did. I was talking to patients about how they feel about getting involved with medical students training. And it made sense to do it in the surgeries that the patients were recruited from, because they usually had meetings in the surgeries, and literally the same meeting rooms where they had meetings in the surgery. And you could see all the exchange of ideas and things that were going on. It was really good. They felt very relaxed because they were used to coming there for their discussions that they have monthly or so. So it's quite good to use that. And if it's students as well, maybe one of their seminar rooms, because they're used to meeting there and having discussions there. Now, the other thing that's very important here is the schedule, the discussion schedule. It's called many names. You could call it focus group schedule, interview schedule. You could call it so guide, interview guide, blah, blah, blah. It's basically a number of questions or things that you want to cover in your interview or focus group. And it's literally a guide. It's not like, it's not a checklist of all the things that you have to do. It's just literally to prompt you so as to remind you the kind of things you want to ask, so that the discussion is all geared towards answering the research question. One thing to remember is that even though it's a discussion, like I've said, it's actually a focused discussion. So it's a discussion that is geared towards the research question. So when you're trying to prepare this guide, you want to tailor it to those research questions. And now I'll share my slides. There we go. So how to prepare your discussion schedule, because this is going to determine how good your discussion is going to turn out in the end. So how do I do this? There we go. Right. 3 parts to the discussion schedule. Apologies, I'll probably say 3 a lot of times today. 3 parts to the discussion schedule. The initial bits, the introductions, and just the welcome and introductions. And then we have the key questions themselves and the rounding up part. And the welcome and introductions is pretty much, again, welcoming everybody, saying something to make them feel comfortable there, introducing yourself, introducing that project again, and that primes them to discuss, for the discussion that's going to follow. And then you let them know the format of the focus group as well. It's important to also, again, take consent, because people might have changed their mind there, or sometimes people have just signed the consent form without reading what's there. So it's important to just take consent and remind people that their expressions, their views, and whatever they've said is going to be recorded. Are they happy for that? Most of the time, everybody will say yes. But if not, then either they can write down their views and then you can add that to it later, or ask them some other questions at the end of the whole recording that's not recorded. And then sometimes it's useful to ask participants to introduce themselves. Of course, if it's an interview, it's only you and that person, and you already know each other's names, so you don't need that. But in a focus group, you want to ask participants to introduce themselves. Now, when I did my own research, I actually didn't do this. I didn't ask participants to introduce themselves. And what happened was, when I was going through the transcript, sometimes it was hard to know who said what. So I had to replay the transcript over and over again many times to know who is who said what, literally. So that's one thing that's very important to know for other focus groups, to ask them to introduce themselves. But it's also actually important because it encourages them to develop rapport between each other. There's a better rapport when you know who you're talking to. Now, going to the real questions themselves, like the key questions, literally, these questions are actually geared towards answering the research questions. But then you don't want to just bounce straight into the main questions. You want to get everybody speaking, because everybody's different. Some people are very, they will say very spontaneous with speaking, and some people are a bit laid back and they don't like to speak a lot. So you want to make it easy for everybody to feel free and get speaking. And something easy to start with is something that is more facts-like, because people are a bit shy of their opinions. But if it's something that is facts-like, then they can, they can feel more comfortable to say that. So something really general, facts like can you explain your role in XYZ, or your experience in XYZ, or what do you understand by, this topic, which of course you've told them about it, and is a general topic which they can really talk about. So in mine, one of the initial questions I asked was, has there ever been a medical student present in your consultation, either in the surgery or in the hospital? Because that's what I was going to be talking about, students interacting with patients. And then some would say yes or no, and then I asked them to tell me about it. And then it's easy for you to recall something that's really happened. And then when they say that, you can then use that to channel other questions. But of course, there will be some times where there will be pauses where you have to think about questions to ask. So that's why you want to then write the other questions. And these questions are the key questions that then answer your research questions. So you could structure these key questions in terms of the chronology, like before, during, after, or timelines, or early in your career, middle career, late career. How did you start this career? What challenges have you faced, and what are the outcomes? Things like that. Or you could structure it according to themes, or literally to the research question. So my themes were, for instance, patients' knowledge about medical education, their ideas about their roles, their ideas about students' roles, barriers and enablers of their involvement in medical training, what support they've received, and their ideas about consent. So those were the themes I used. But it's important to think about those research questions and what themes you want to use, because that will then guide that discussion you're going to be having. Now, under each theme, it's up to you. Everybody have different styles. Some people just like to know just the main topics to talk about, and they'll just literally take it from there. Some people want to have the specific questions to ask, so that when there's that pause, or when there's, when you don't know what to say, you have that question, you can just pick up from there. So under each of those themes, you can then put a few questions, about 2 or 3 questions to ask under that. And, like for instance, and when you're, in terms of those questions, you want to start from the general questions to then specific questions. And then you also want to go from the positive ones, because those are easier to answer, and to the negative ones, or the ones that are a bit more sensitive. And you also want to start from the ones that are unpeeled to the ones that have peels, because sometimes they won't really, know what to say. Then you want to direct them a bit more. So for instance, under patients' knowledge about medical education and training, the kinds of questions I asked was, what kind of things do you know about medical education and training? What kind of things do you think is important for patients to know? And what type of information has been provided to you in the past? And what do you think? And how can we help patients to know more about medical education and training? So those are the types of questions to ask under each of them. And then once you've got that, it's very important to get this right, because like I said, it guides your researches. This is something that's useful to speak to your supervisors or the research team, or sometimes even just speak with colleagues about these things, and then they can, give you feedback on things that you can ask, or things that are like, I don't think I'll add that. Also, in terms of the questions here, it's because you want to get their opinions about these things. You want them to be open questions. So the WH questions: who, what, when, why, and then how. Because that gets people talking, rather than questions that are very direct, the yes or no questions, or questions that have just 2 answers that, literally, you don't get a lot of conversation around that. Hugh, is there anything you want to add with regards to the key questions?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Dorian. I guess all I would add would be, especially with focus groups rather than interviews, it's important to remember that you're trying to encourage a group discussion, aren't you? So I've certainly done some focus groups in the early days where I'd have 5 people there, and it would simply be me asking each of the 5 individually all the different questions. And that's not a focus group. That's just multiple interviews in one place at one time. So I usually even suggest to people that within the schedule, they write in little reminders. So if someone offers a view, then really important then to look around the rest of the group and say, what do other people think? Do people have similar experiences or different experiences? And try as much as you can to encourage a discussion amongst participants, with always the risk that they will then go off track and you might have to bring them back to the topic of discussion. But yeah, little reminders to remind yourself, or if someone says, oh yes, I did that, get them, oh, tell me more about it. Tell me more, as you would with either a patient or with any good communication skills. But that sometimes helps just as a reminder on the schedule.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. I think it's quite interesting having the focus, especially focus group. They will go off track sometimes, and you want to just guide them back. And sometimes it's quite interesting when you're reading the transcript, the kind of things people, adding to the discussions. In the closing, the third part is just literally you just being sure that you've understood what they mean by what they've said. So you want to summarize what's been discussed. You want to reflect if that represents their views and ask them if you've missed anything. Because sometimes, even though you've thought about your themes and things that you think are important with regards to that topic, there might be something that they feel is important as well that you've not introduced as part of your key questions. So you want to just ask them, thank you for something. An example would be, thank you for your time today. Is there anything important that I have not covered? Or is there anything else you would like to add here? And then they add something. Again, one of the focus groups I was having with patients, it was at this last bit here that somebody mentioned something very important about patient involvement, about students, about the value of having students involved in their care, that because they're very enthusiastic, they can enhance their care. And that was really, really important thing. And then I carried that on to the next focus group that I was having to explore that further. And then if you've talked about reimbursement, then you sort that out at the closing. Just write that there, because sometimes you might forget to do that if you've not written that there in the plan, in the schedule. Right, do we have any questions? Okay, so I've got some a small group task for you. Oh yeah, somebody wants to ask? No. Okay, I've got a breakout room task for you. So I'd like you to discuss in your groups what key questions you would include in a discussion schedule for research on the barriers and facilitators to teaching undergraduate medical students in general practice. So that's one of Hugh's research. I thought it was an easy one to prepare a discussion schedule for. So don't worry about the introduction part. Don't worry about the conclusion part, because those are almost the same for all research. But just the key questions, you could think about what themes, what kinds of questions you ask, or you could actually write down the questions, a few questions you would ask. And because some of you are already researching a topic and some of you are planning to research a topic, it might be more helpful for you to choose one of the topics you already have, that you're already doing or you're interested in, rather than using this one. But I've just brought this one as an example because, if you don't have a topic, then you can use our Hughes topic to channel the discussion. Because this is your group, this is your tribe, one of the important things about the ClinEdR research is to network, to enable networking and all that. I'd like you to introduce yourselves in the group, what you're doing, what your research interest is, which part of the country you're in, and then, go into this discussions. Lee, can we have the breakout rooms for 12 minutes?
We're not going to go around every group just to ask, what did you discuss? Because you've already discussed that. But I just wanted to give any groups an opportunity either to make some suggestions to Dorian from the questions she set, but also if there are any questions that came out from the group that you weren't sure of or you thought would be interesting for everyone to hear, then now is your opportunity.
Can I just ask how much you might put into the questions, things that you've like read in the literature or things that you think might be the answer, or how much do you just leave it to come out with new stuff?
Really good question. So I'll leave that for Dorian.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, thanks, Miriam. And I have another question as well from, I don't know your name, iPhone 4. So okay, so Miriam, how do you decide the questions? How do you pick the questions? Absolutely important to use the literature because your research is actually building on the literature. You don't want your research to be something that stands on its own. It's like literally adding on to what has been found in the literature. So before you start the research, you have already read some about the literature, what the topics, what people are discussing, what issues are important, what are the pertinent issues around that topic that you want to explore further. So you're doing two things in your interview and your focus groups. You are confirming what is already known to see if there's, there might be changes or there might be misunderstanding in that, what we think is already known, but also you want to uncover new things, new ideas about it. So yes, you want to use the literature to help you structure the questions and then, add more things. Usually in the literature as well, they've suggested other things that you want to explore. So you explore those new things as well.
And if I might add, actually, because I think it's a really important question, what you might often do, say if the question was barriers to teaching, whatever the question we set was, you'd start nice and open from participants here. What are the barriers? Get them to discuss as many as you can. And then you might actually then on the interview schedule, list 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 that have been raised by the literature. So you might say, well, these are things that have been raised before. What does anyone think about, financial influences being a barrier? And then get confirmation or not confirmation from the group. So you may have questions on your schedule that you will only ask if things haven't been raised already. And that's absolutely fine to do. The other thing is if you're doing interviews, for example, a series of interviews, the first participant may raise a really important barrier, which then you want to ask the next interviewees about, and that's absolutely fine. Just a little note to say, if it's not been raised before, I will ask about X, Y, and Z. So really important question, Miriam. Thank you.
I had another question, and that question was about how do you calibrate the questions? How do you know that the questions you're asking do actually work? Like how do you make sure you're asking the right questions? Now, the thing about it is, because this is qualitative research, we don't really talk about calibrating the questions as we do with quantitative research. You are more interested in your questions doing the job you wanted to do, and that is giving us new knowledge, giving us idea about what people understand about the topic and their experiences, which you don't really know. So your questions are supposed to uncover things you don't really know. So as long as they do that, that's fine. That's literally what you want. How do you make sure they work? So you want to think about, number one, working means it's answering your research questions, which you've already written out before. So you are tailoring those questions, the research questions, to the research questions. That's number one. Number two, you're also speaking to your research team to say, does that question I've asked, does it do what I'm thinking it's supposed to do? Or should I be restructuring it in a way that is clear, Because sometimes I might have asked a question and the participant answers something else, which is also fine because whatever they've answered, as long as it's related to the topic, is still useful information. Then you can then help them back. If you asked it in the wrong way, you can then reword or restructure the question in a way that it's clearer. So you kind of learn as you're going on. So that's number two. So the research team, number two, practice, number three. Then also many times it's really good practice to have, user involvement in research. And that's what user involvement, that's exactly what they do. They help you, give you advice about, these are things that I think are important to us, or that question, that doesn't really sound right, or people won't take that question nicely. It doesn't sound in a nice way. You want to structure it, or you want to word it in a different way. And then you can also discuss with colleagues as well. Sometimes we have some peer groups that we can talk about, and then they can say, give you advice on how to reward it. So you literally different ways of doing it, but there's no wrong way, because you're just going to have a chat, and as you're having the chat, you kind of rephrase or you kind of go with the flow, literally, just like having a chat about the kind of car to buy. You can just keep on asking more questions until you get what you want about that car.
Can I add a fourth, Dorian? I know you like your threes, but a fourth might be to do a pilot interview, a pilot focus group, which then leaves, to test out the questions. Are they answering, like you said, are they answering the questions you want? It then may lead to the discussion which I had last week with a team, which was, can you then include your pilot interview or focus group within your research write-up? Generally, yes, because it's qualitative work, it's iterative. You don't have to ask every single participant exactly the same questions because it's qualitative, not quantitative. But that will be an interesting one to discuss later on in your research.
Thanks, Hugh. Now, this brings us nicely to the next part, which is the interview themselves or the focus groups themselves. We've literally said most of the things that are supposed to be said here. Once you've done your focus group schedule, you've got everything ready, literally most of the job is done. It's just to use your schedule as a guide to have that chat you're having. And the important things here is to remember that your guide is only a guide. You're just using it to remind you of things to cover. You want to go with the flow. So if participants have said something that's important but you've not thought about, you follow that up. So you literally, you want to ask more questions to clarify, to understand more of what they've said. Why is that so? What do they mean by this? What can help with that thing? So you want to literally ask more questions from when they've answered your first question, you want to use that to ask them more questions to follow up. And don't make any assumptions that you understand what's being said or as to why it is. Just keep asking. And then you also want to, when there are pauses, that's when you then, you've explored that enough, then you can then bring on the next topic and then keep going. You want to also look at the cues as well. If they've, if it looks like some of the participants are not agreeing with something, you want to follow that up, or you're shaking your head, or you don't sound quite sure about that. What do you feel about that? And then follow that up. Important thing as to between focus groups and interviews, as he was said, is you don't want your focus groups to be a dialogue between you and each of the participants. So you want to, as they said, literally, you want to ask other people, whether they agree or disagree with what somebody has said, and you want to promote debate during the focus group as well. Another thing to do to encourage that kind of dialogue and exchange of ideas between participants rather than between you and the participants. At the beginning, you can also signpost them saying, they don't have to agree, and people don't have to agree with what has been said. So if you have a new opinion or a different opinion, feel free to share that you're more interested in a variety of ideas rather than a consensus, so they feel happy about it. Somebody asked something very interesting in the small group, so I'll bring that to the big group. And the question was, how do you make sure that one person doesn't monopolize the whole focus group when you have lots of people there? And also, when you have power differences, like maybe different professions or different stages of, different roles, how do you deal with that power interaction? So first of all, the power interaction, one is, these are things that are important to consider when you're planning your focus group, or, interviews are easy, isn't it? Because it's one-on-one, but focus group is things to consider. So one of the research I've done is about finding out the barriers and facilitators to ClinEdR, people doing clinical education research. What we decided is that all the various professions we're going to have homogeneous groups of different professions so that everybody, they have similar backgrounds, similar experiences, so it's easier to facilitate that discussion. Also, I did that in my research on patient involvement, where we had patients separately, students separately, and doctors separately. And it was so interesting that the kind of things the doctors said, it was so interesting. They would never have said that if they had patients there as well. So that's one, find differences. The second one is, how do you make sure that it's not a monopoly of one person? Now, what to do is to ensure that, so if one person has been doing most of the talking, then you can thank that person nicely and say, thank you for what you've said, Helen. Does anybody else? And then you use your eye contact. You just look at the group, and usually people follow where your eyes are. So if you're directing your gaze at that person, then you're encouraging that person to keep going. But if you look at other people, then everybody kind of follow. And then, does anybody agree or have other views or have anything to add to what Helen has said? And then other people kind of start to speak as well. So it's very important to use that as well. Hugh talked about you want a fine line between going in people's direction, like I said, go with the flow, and avoiding going off topic. Because if you go with the flow too much, if you agree too much, then things will start to go off topic at a point. And sometimes the off topic is interesting because it adds more background and context to that topic you're talking about. But if that off topic is too much, then you don't have enough time to cover the things you want to cover. So you want to guide them back. So something as simple as, oh, that's very interesting. I remember one of the patient focus groups I said, that's very interesting. We'll leave Dr. Alberti to sort that out with the surgery. And then let's go back to, what kind of information would be useful to provide patients about training. And they literally understood it and, started talking about the topic again. One of the advantages of focus group is it allows and helps people to interact and just pass time. So let them enjoy it. You enjoy it as well. They get some benefit from it as well. Okay, Hugh, do you have anything to add to moderating your focus groups or interviews?
No, I think that was very well said, and apologies because I probably jumped the gun and talked about it a bit earlier. But I think it's just good communication skills that all of us, if we're clinicians, will have, and then just encouraging discussion. So nothing else to add.
Thanks. I'll throw it to the floor. I know some people have done focus groups and interviews. Do you want to share any of your experiences, what's worked well and what challenges you faced?
I've actually hosted some PPI focus group previously, not focus group, but PPI group previously, where all of the participants have their cameras turned off. So I was wondering, how do you sort of try to handle the situation where you're hosting like an online focus group and everyone's camera's not on?
I'll leave that to you to answer. Thanks.
Really hard. Those of us who teach undergraduates, probably postgraduates actually, those of us who teach, which is probably most of us, probably have the same dilemmas of, do you insist that people put on videos or not? And I think it's easier when you're teaching because you can set it as this is what is expected for everyone. Obviously, for focus groups, people are offering their time usually free. And usually volunteers. So I don't have any answers. I'll just say, yes, it's tricky.
Thanks, Hugh. So what I agree with Hugh in terms of they are using their time. And also we have to remember that being that it's a PPI group, sometimes they might be in a difficult situation whereby they don't have enough privacy. Some people have to go to public places just to use the computers to do these things. So we want to be as flexible as we can, especially with PPI groups and even with participants, because you don't know what situations that they're in, and you want to encourage them as well. So you want the barriers to them, you want to reduce the hurdles that they have to climb to be able to do these things. So it's one of the things that people kind of get used to when they're doing even teaching as well. Sometimes I don't like it, but sometimes I have to, accommodate that. Definitely with research, I wouldn't, it's their choice, really. It's their choice of how much of their context or of their space or their privacy they want to let go of to help you with your research at the end of the day. So remember that even nowadays, people do interviews on the phone and you don't see anybody, you don't see them and all that. And it still works fine because you can collect that data. I know it's not the same thing, but you kind of just work through it.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you, Gloria. And sometimes as well, I think I've done one of the focus group I've done is people were not talking that much. So what I asked people to type in their thoughts, like to think about it, maybe just a minute to think about, whatever question and stuff like that, and then type in their thoughts. And you could see very interesting data coming in the chat box. and then I can then bring up some of them and then discuss about it, and they were very happy to do. So there are other ways to promote interaction, even though the camera is off. Thanks.
I might just finish. Oh, go on, someone else talking. Or is that just me? I might just finish my last, maybe not particularly useful comment was going to be one of the very first focus groups I was involved with. We did it over lunchtime with some trainees, thinking great. We got some funding to offer free lunch. We then had real problems listening to the focus groups, because people were eating their crisps at the same time. So I'd say if you're going to have food, then make sure you have the food before you start the interviews. Anyway, sorry, over to you, Dorian, for the last slide or two.
Thank you. We'll add that to our tips here. Don't give crisps, give something else. The last part of our conducting interviews and focus group is reflection. You want to reflect afterwards because it can actually add context to the data. Please ignore my top tips. I just put that ready to save time. To reflect afterwards, because so things like what's the context? What things in the context have affected your data? Did it rain that day? Did people find it difficult to find the venue? Did something big happen in the country that day that have affected people's mood? Or is it around students' exams that have affected the way they feel about something? They might feel very strongly about assessments if half of the class have failed their exams, recently. So just things like that to jot down, but also jotting down the key points you've brought from that data. What kind of initial themes do you think are coming out from that data? Did anything surprise? Is there anything new? Or was there something you couldn't really explore properly that you carry on to the next one? So just literally some writing down. And it's interesting because my writing down after the research, because my MD was 6 years, when I was doing the write-up, I had to go through those writing to help me, put some smaller details there. So sometimes those things are quite useful. So I will share my top tips for doing good, conducting good focus groups and interviews. First of all, you want to prepare a good schedule that helps you. You want to use the schedule as a guide, not a checklist of questions to be asked. Be ready to be taken along different paths. It makes your data interesting. That's how you get rich data. But you also want to guide the discussion to make sure that you remain relevant to the topic. So it's a balance, and it's sometimes a trade-off as well. You can read and learn from other published studies how they've done it, and you kind of use their methods for recruitment. And like somebody had talked about, how do you divide the participants? You can kind of learn from what other people have done, and think of it as a chart. It's just literally a chart. We do this every day. We do this with patients every day. It's just literally this one is with a purpose in mind. And finally, just do it. So do, reflect, and improve. Thank you. Oops, delete I said. And this is a recommended reading because it really gets towards medical education research.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Dorian. That was really, really useful. I hope, thank you, Lee, for putting up the next slide. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than we've had time to discuss, but I think that final message from Dorian, just do it. Read all the stuff, find out all you can, and then give it a go. It would be would probably be my message from me as well. Someone's asked already, but the slides will be uploaded on the website shortly. I was going to say, I don't know, Lee, exactly what day, but shortly, so they'll be available along with the slides from the other presentations. Dorian and I will be around still in the Zoom call just for the next few minutes. So if folk do have any other questions that they want to ask, then stay on and ask if they felt too shy in front of the huge audience we had today. And the slide we've got there is the next session next month. Jumped ahead of me. So Wednesday, March the 20th. And so you've done your interviews, you've done your focus groups. What on earth do you do with this transcript you've now got? So you'll find out next month, and Megan Brown will be joining us. And was there one more slide, Luke? Look, fantastic team. And then these are the other sessions that we've got coming up to complete our whole series. As I said, the preceding webinars are all available on the website to have a look at if you'd like to. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for your time and attendance. I realise you're busy folks. I really appreciate you coming. I hope that was helpful. If you do have any feedback or any comments, then do contact us. Otherwise, do hold on if you've got a question or two that you want to ask Dorian or myself just for the next few minutes. Otherwise, have a good day, everyone. Nice to see you all.